Hi everyone. Let's talk Uranus in Gemini, something that is going to happen on July 7th. If you've watched my June astrology, July astrology, even before that, I've been talking about the shift of the heavy hitters, as I like to call them, from earth and water to fire and air. So the next several years are going to look much, much different. Pluto in November moved into air sign, I was going to say fire, air sign Aquarius. For about the next 20 years, Neptune arrived in fire sign Aries. Let me just look at my notes. On the 30th of March. And of course, Uranus on July 7th is going to arrive in air sign Gemini. So they will retrograde, Neptune and Uranus will retrograde back into their former signs. But by 2026, this is going to be the setup, and it'll be a much different energy, I keep saying, from when they were sitting in earth signs and water signs. But I want to focus on Uranus today, and specifically Uranus and Gemini. There's a lot to say about the interaction between these three, because obviously there's going to be a trine between Uranus and Pluto. And of course, Neptune in between is sextiling both of them. So that will be subject for another video. First, let me give you the dates. Uranus moves into Gemini from July 7th to November 7th of this year, goes back into Taurus on November 7th, and returns to Gemini on April 25th of 2026, and stays until August of 2032. Then we'll begin moving into Cancer. Let's talk a little bit about Gemini, the third house, because for all of us, this will be taking place in the third house, and talk about Uranus. And then I did a little bit of a return back in history, because this is the first time in 84 years that we've seen Uranus in Gemini. So what happened the other times? That's a lot how we can tell how the energy plays out by looking at, obviously, what sign and what house the planet is in, but also what happened the times before. Gemini is the first of the air signs associated with the third house, ruled by Mercury. So Gemini is all about communication, the mind. All air signs represent a duality. When we think of Libra, the scales, Aquarius, the two airwaves, of course, Gemini, the twins. So Gemini, again, remember, ruled by Mercury. So it'll sound like the same terms a little bit if you've heard me talk about Mercury. The idea of being very curious, intellectually curious, very communicative, liking to compare things. In Libra, we strive for balance more. And of course, as we get to the final air sign, remember the planets open onto the collective as we cycle through them. We're getting more towards harmony of the group. But Gemini likes to compare, likes to see how things fit together or are different. Gemini is very quick as the first of the air sign, still related to self, but how self relates to the rest of the world. So that's why Gemini is very quickly exploring ideas, quickly exploring concepts. Everything is very much of the mental activity. What's around me? How does this fit in? How does that fit in? What's this? What's that? Gemini's bad rap is that they're two-faced. That's often, what you hear, the twins, oh, they're two-faced. It's just that Gemini is going through everything so quickly and moving from one idea to the other so quickly. Very, very curious sign that by the time the rest of us clue in, because Gemini is going much faster than the rest of us clue in, Gemini has already moved on to something else. Remember, Gemini is mutable air. There is one modality per element. So we have fixed air with Aquarius. We have cardinal air with Libra, but we have mutable air. The mutable signs are when the seasons change. So, of course, Gemini is end of spring into summer, but the most flexible of all the air signs. So think very, very quick-minded with Gemini. A lot of flexibility and a lot of adaptability as well. The third house, of course, is our communications hub. When you hear me talk about the third house, I say our writing, our speaking, even our thought process, our internal dialogue. It has everything to do with a grade school education, high school education, those involved in that. It is letter carriers. It is rumors and gossip. And I'm going to drill down a little bit into this. Of course, I said rumors and gossip, messages, It's our mindset. So not just our writing and speaking per se, what it is, but our style of doing that. Remember, along with elementary and high school education, it's technical training as well. It's all our short trips around town. I say familiar faces and places, commutes to work, day trips, things like weekend getaways. It's our siblings, cousins, neighbors as well, our everyday or local world contacts. So we're talking about the mind, we're talking about communications, we're talking about thinking very, very quickly. We can have things related to siblings, cousins, other kin, our neighbors, and it is our local world. Again, remember, familiar faces and places. And let's just finish by talking about Uranus. Uranus, my goodness, the great disruptor. Uranus's job is to release tension. Uranus doesn't care if things are good or bad, if I'm doing a good thing or a bad thing. It's just the need to disrupt. We talk about breakthroughs, breakdowns, separations, surprises, awakenings, whatever is futuristic. Uranus relates to electricity, the new age, unpredictable events. We say expect the unexpected with Uranus. But Uranus fundamentally is about seeking freedom. So remember that it's all about finding freedom. Uranus follows Saturn in our solar system. Saturn is very boundaried, limited, structured, and Uranus wants us to break free from all that. When it's become too familiar, too old, too restrictive, we're not learning anymore, we're not evolving anymore, we're just tired of being stuck in that same rut. Uranian energy comes in and pushes us out of that. There's very much, a bolt out of the blue energy with Uranus, or that a shock of electricity, right? That zap that gets us going. So functioning in a very unpredictable way, we sometimes say fateful events as well, but always in that very erratic, unpredictable way. And remember, Uranus is very much related to technology, the unseen, completely out there. So it's hard, and I struggled in the July astrology, and my July astrology is up for all signs, but I kept saying I can't give you an example because this maybe isn't even invented yet, or maybe isn't even perfected yet. It's still at the conceptual level, and we don't really know about it. It's not really mainstream yet. But just remember, whatever is technological, also related to electricity, but just something that is completely outside of the box. So what could that all mean when we put it all together? Well, obviously, we are talking a revolution in communication. When we look back in history, the last time Uranus was in Gemini was from 1942 to 1949. So towards the end and the aftermath of World War II. Now, one thing I found super interesting, and I discovered this not researching this video, but researching old German radios, because I have an old German-made radio from, I think, the late 50s, something my grandfather had and my grandmother purchased. My grandfather purchased it, and my grandmother gave to me several years ago, and it still works, interestingly enough. But I discovered, talking about communications, in Germany, during the war years under Nazi rule, there were small mass-made radios, German-made, obviously, very, very economically priced. The goal was to have one in each German household. Why? To listen to music? No, of course not. To listen to Nazi propaganda. The radio was called, and pardon my awful German, but a Volksempfänger, which literally means the people's receiver. It was cheap, it was mass-produced, and it was at the request of Hitler's Minister of Propaganda, which was Joseph Goebbels, if memory serves me correctly. And let me check. I know I put it somewhere in my notes. Yes, it was Goebbels. This radio, interestingly enough, and we'll talk about this. I think this is an interesting point, and we'll see more of this now, even today, but it didn't have shortwave, and it lacked the markings to tune it in precisely to European stations. So you just had to roll the dial up and down. Obviously, they didn't want people listening to anything else but their propaganda. There wasn't any need to listen to another station, so why make it easy on people? And interestingly, you'll see it's going to tie in. Often propaganda is a ninth house matter, but this is going to tie in because it becomes our communications and what we're receiving as a message. And just finalizing on this because I thought it was so interesting. It didn't pick up weak signals, so whatever was elsewhere in other countries, obviously they didn't want anybody, as I said, listening to anybody else, just to German government radio. But the BBC did increase their signal. Ha ha. You know, sometimes at night, I don't know if you're in my age category, you can remember actual AM radio or FM radio. But at night, you can pick up certain stations that are much, much farther away. So this radio could do this a little bit, and the BBC went and increased their signal, of course, just to mess with them, I guess. But listening to foreign stations became a criminal offense in Nazi Germany. Of course, broadcasting was a criminal offense. If you've ever watched the movie or read the book, All the Light We Cannot See, the main character is broadcasting, I think, on shortwave, and she is somewhere in Saint Malo during the German occupation of France, and they are desperately trying to find her and arrest her because this just isn't allowed. I won't tell you the whole punch. I won't spoil it for you, but it was an excellent, excellent movie. Also during that time, we saw the use of ciphering communication, so scrambling communications to make them hard to read. We talk about the Enigma machine. I believe there's also a movie on that. So again, everything having to do with communications. Remember, Uranus is also tech. So we saw the first atomic bomb tested in 1942 in New Mexico. It's called the Manhattan Project, if that is familiar to you, or if you've ever heard that word. I think there's also a movie on that. There probably is. It was tested in 1945 of the same year, so finalized or ready to go in 1942, and then actually tested in 1945 and then used the same year, obviously. When we say something that has never before been seen, that was an example. Of course, when those bombs were dropped, there was more than one towards the end of the Second World War on Nagasaki and Hiroshima. That was just something that people had never seen. This level of tech, obviously in a destructive fashion, but this level of technology. With the idea of also siblings and kin, you can think during the Second World War, everyone knew someone who had gone off to fight. If we go further back in time, going way back to the 1400s, 1439 to 1447, of course, Uranus and Gemini again. Johannes Gutenberg invented the printing press in 1440. Hope my pronunciation was good. Probably wasn't. So now writing could be mass produced. This was another communication revolution, right? Everything either had to be hand printed or hand copied. Think of monks, spending years recopying a Bible type of thing. But now we could mass produce things. There were pamphlets printed that were called church indulgences, or sometimes more in a bootleg hidden fashion, something with political satire or a political opinion. Later, the Bible. And this was considered mass communication at the time. In about 50 years, we printed close to 50,000 books. And interestingly, tied in with the Reformation at the time because we were printing Bibles in English. So for the first time, and probably in French and German, I believe Luther was from Germany, but for the first time now people could read the Bible themselves. It wasn't in Latin anymore. So think of that as this incredible communication revolution for each individual. And just speaking of the Bible, Uranus and Gemini, again from 1606 to 1614, the King James Bible was published during that period in 1611. Remember, Gemini is also duality of communications, concepts, and ideas. It is true Uranus was in Gemini at the beginning of the Civil War, of course, along with Neptune in Aries. That's the setup we have now if you're listening to other astrologers, and so you should be. We're hearing a lot of that. It's not a big secret what's going on in the world. Yes, there is a lot of volatile energy out there. But yes, this was the placement at the beginning of the Civil War, the Revolutionary War, and also soon after the U.S. entered World War II. Remember I said it started in 1942, and I think the U.S. entered in 1941 after Pearl Harbor. So this duality can easily become dueling. I think maybe what we're going to see is very much different in terms of education. I remember I said grade school, high school education. I was thinking about this before doing this video. I always find it somewhat heartbreaking when I see these little kids, you're like 5 years old with their little lunch boxes, getting on the bus, going to school for the day. This is my mother heart. Um, I am not, this obviously education isn't my wheelhouse. Is it good? Isn't it good? There's probably arguments on either side of the spectrum. They need to socialize. They need to learn a routine to function in a group, to learn autonomy. At the same time, there's a lot of children who are homeschooled, and I don't think anything dramatic has happened there. But my future predictions are, I'm thinking education will change, and I think a lot in rural areas. I was raised in a small town, and there were people I went to school with that lived in a rural area that almost had an hour-long bus ride in the morning and in the late afternoon when they went home. And that's, 5 days a week, 2 hours a day almost. Could it be something virtual and maybe one day a week they'd go to class? Could it be smaller classrooms? Okay, hey, today everybody's going over to the Jones house, and you'll have, I'm thinking again in a rural area, I don't know, 8, 10 kids, and there's a screen, and they'll interact there and, go to school that way. And then maybe, once a week or whatever, twice a week, they can actually go into class and be there in person. I don't know. That's one of the things I'm thinking that could come up. Definitely the way we all communicate is going to be revolutionized. I think there is going to be information overload. I keep saying discernment is going to be our watchword. There's going to be so much going on in a much more sophisticated fashion. Uranus is going to have much more ease in Gemini than he did in Taurus. Taurus is very fixed, very much about sustaining, maintaining, growing. This is going to be, let's go, let's do it, let's try it, let's see what happens. Much more sophisticated forms of communication, maybe much more real forms of communication. I think this can be worrying a bit, and there's only so much information we can process. When we talk about siblings and kin, could this be someone that feels like kin that is more online? Could it be completely artificial? Could we have, an artificial intelligence companion? I think that already even exists. Would that become more mainstream? I'm thinking more holographic meetups where you meet with people online, but it isn't just that two-dimensional through a screen aspect. It's like you're really there. You would have maybe goggles of some sort, or I don't know. I'm still struggling again to give you examples, but instead of you seeing everybody at Christmas dinner, on your screen, and they see you on the screen, it could be like you're sitting there, and you look to your right and there's Auntie Hilda, and you look to your left. I'm doing this backwards. You look to your left and there's your cousin George, type of thing. Could that be something we're going to see? But definitely more information coming in. And there's going to be an information communication revolution, definitely. I was talking about the printing press. It sounds so quaint when we look back 1400, 600 odd years, but that was mind-blowing to them back in the day. And there's going to be something that is going to be just as mind-blowing to us. And things are going to go faster and faster. And again, my only worry or question mark is, will we be able to keep up? Almost all of this will probably be online. Will it be something that we're plugged in even more 24/7? We're all carrying our phones around now. Again, if you're my age, Gen X or before, or even maybe a little bit after, do you remember when there was a landline? Like, remember when you had to actually walk to the phone? Phone, you had to get up and go to the phone. There was one phone per household. Now we're walking around with this device, and everything is on that. Is it going to be something else in, some other shape that's going to be always on us, that we're always going to be, communicating and using? And again, what do we pay attention to, right? It's hard to discern what to pay attention to and what not to pay attention to. And it sort of creeps up on us. This is all very well designed. And I think it's going to get even more sophisticated in the way it creeps up on us and just sucks us in. And then, next thing you know, you've gone down this rabbit hole, or you've been scrolling for half an hour, and there's a time warp. There's a time warp when you somehow get pulled into this. And again, that need to be vigilant, that need for discernment, there's only so much our human brains can process, and our human brains are designed to pick up on fear because we're programmed for survival. So, even if we don't want to look, we're going to check. If you want your species to survive, you react to whatever seems to be fearful. So, think of if you're shopping and you walk out into the parking lot with your car and you hear people yelling at each other, you're inevitably going to look. You're going to think, what's going on? You're going to locate it. Oh, is it just two people that haven't seen each other in a long time and they recognize each other and they're shouting like, across a row of parked cars? Or is there an argument going on? And I think a lot of this is going to come in under the cloak of fear because it makes us look. And the media has picked up on that a long time ago. And people who want to get their message across or communicate often come or use that technique, right? Know this before it's too late. That's why I always say I don't do scary astrology. I could title this Uranus and Gemini, watch before it's too late, you must know, or, sometimes I do title things must knows, like in, here's a primer, here's some advice about what you should know about the energy, but that always, disastrous, oh my gosh, you're not going to know and you're going to be left out and it's going to be something really bad. No, but this is something I think the media and communications specialists or people who are good in communication have picked up on long time ago. And they use that to pull us in. Before we used to read the newspaper and nobody knew what we were reading exactly or what section. It was actually like printed on newsprint type paper. But now it's easy to tell what's being clicked on. It's easy to tell how much time people spend on different things. And in his book, Loser Think, Scott Adams talks about this, and Scott Adams is well-versed in hypnosis and persuasion, and it is worth the read. But let me just quote you from his book. He says, the business model of the press has changed from presenting information to manipulating brains. As the press becomes increasingly skilled at stimulating the emotional centers of our brains, one should expect the public to be in a continuous state of fight or flight anxiety. And you know what? It's not that far off from what we're witnessing, right? Some people are just in such a state. So again, discernment is going to be the watchword. There are wonderful things, I am sure, that can come out of Uranus and Gemini. At the same time, there is stuff that is changing very, very fast and is going to leave us feeling destabilized and not really knowing what to do with it. And just remember, there's only so much your brain can take. There's only so many relationships a human can maintain. There's only so much information we can process. So always be asking yourself, do I feel good about this? Is it making me feel better? Am I learning something? Is it serving me? Your time and your energy are finite, so do guard them wisely. And I am not going to go into this sextile to Neptune. I think, though, we are in for I'll say a rough ride, some interesting times. May you live in interesting times. Wasn't a joyful wish. It was actually a curse. But we're just going to have to, again, really question ourselves on who is saying what, where it's coming from, what the idea behind what is being presented is. If you want to know where this falls for your sign, it is in my July astrology, and it is all time-stamped, so you can quickly get to that. So I might do another video. Let me be unpredictable about Uranus. I might do another video and pop back in and talk about this some more. I might talk about this sextile to Neptune. Again, very volatile energy going on. There's a lot of, I will just add this on before finishing, a lot of ideals. I have 3 videos on Neptune, and one of them I talk about a lot of ideals, but in an individualistic way. So I'm doing this, and, or we're following this person who's all about this ideal, but then we're clashing with other people and other ideals. So I remain positive and optimistic. I think perhaps this could be something that will serve us well in terms of education, in terms of communication. But yes, there is a lot of change coming up that we're going to have to navigate as well. So As always, I welcome all comments. Let me know what you think. Let me know if you are already feeling the effects. So thanks for watching, guys. Take care. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.